The day my son told me to leave his house, it wasn't the roof that broke above me. It was my heart. That afternoon, the sky above Lagos was too bright for sorrow, yet my world had turned dark. I stood outside the mansion I once helped him build, holding a single brown bag in my hand, the same bag that had carried his baby clothes years ago. Now it carried only a few torn garments, a Bible, and a heart too heavy for my old body to bear. The gates closed behind me with a sound sharper than thunder. Inside, laughter still floated from the living room. Voices that once called me Mama now whispered my name like a stranger's. "My son," I whispered under my breath. "How did we get here?" I could still see him, David, standing at the doorway in his fine white shirt, gold watch glinting under the sun, his eyes cold, unrecognizable. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He only said 6 words that cut deeper than 1,000 knives. "Mother, it's time for you to go." The calm in his voice was what shattered me most. I wanted anger, something I could reason with. But silence. Silence is a weapon that leaves no scars, only emptiness. As I stepped through the gates, the heat from the ground burned through my slippers, yet my body felt cold. I had worked under this same sun for years, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, starving so my boy could eat. But never had the sun felt so cruel. I turned once more toward the house, hoping he'd call me back, hoping his wife's whisper wouldn't be the final voice he obeyed. But the door stayed shut. The house was alive, yet to me it was already a tomb. I pressed my hand against my chest to calm the trembling. I thought of the nights I had carried him as a sick child, singing old lullabies until the fever broke. I remembered his first job, his first suit, the tears of joy when he bought this very house and said, "Mama, this is our home." But now the word "our" had vanished. The street ahead was bright and noisy, cars honking, children laughing, hawkers calling out prices. But none of it touched me. The world was moving forward while I was being erased. I walked slowly, feeling the weight of years dragging behind me. I didn't cry. My tears had long learned to hide themselves. Instead, I whispered prayers under my breath, not for revenge, but for understanding. "Lord," I said softly, "if this is the road you have written for me, give me the strength to walk it. And if my son has lost his way, let your mercy find him before regret does." When I reached the end of the street, I stopped and looked back one last time. The mansion stood tall, glass windows gleaming, palm trees swaying. But behind that beauty was the ugliest pain a mother could feel, being forgotten by the child she raised with her soul. The bag in my hand felt heavier now, as if every memory I'd ever carried had settled inside it. But I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to keep walking, even if my steps led into darkness. The evening wind brushed against my face, and with it came the echo of his childhood laughter, the same laugh that once made every struggle worth it. For a moment, I almost believed I'd hear it again, but no sound came. Only the quiet voice of fate whispering that my journey was not ending. It was only beginning. That night, I walked into the streets with nothing, not knowing God had already written a twist my son would never forget. Before he had gold, I had hunger, but every bite I gave away was love. When I look back now, I see a younger version of myself, a girl with calloused hands and foolish hope. I was not born into wealth, I was born into warning. Everyone in my family said the same words when I told them I wanted to marry Daniel, the man who would later leave me behind. "Margaret," my mother said, "love cannot feed you." But I was young, stubborn, and drunk on the kind of love that promises heaven, even while standing on sand. When Daniel left, the world around me didn't collapse. It simply turned silent. I had a baby in my arms and no one to call my own. The nights were long and loud, with the cries of hunger, and the days burned with the ache of work I never thought I could survive. My neighbors pitied me. My family abandoned me. and even the church women whispered behind my back. She refused to listen, they said. Let her learn through suffering. But I didn't let their words drown me. Each morning, before the sun was fully awake, I would tie David to my back and walk into the streets, hunting for work that no one else wanted. I washed clothes until my fingers cracked open, carried basins of water until my shoulders screamed, and scrubbed rich people's floors until my knees bled. When there was no soap, I used ash. When there was no water, I wiped with tears. There were nights when I boiled water just to make him believe food was coming. I remember him asking with his little voice, "Mama, can I have some?" And I would smile, hiding my empty stomach, and say, "Eat first, my son. I will eat later." But there was no later. When he grew older, I began working at the market, cleaning stalls, selling small items, anything that could keep us alive one more day. My arms grew strong, my back bent, and my voice roughened with shouting and prayer. Yet every coin I earned, every grain of rice I saved, felt like a victory against despair. At night, when David slept, I would sit by the small kerosene lamp, patching his school uniform, whispering prayers over the fabric. Lord, don't let my son's destiny end in poverty. Make him shine, even if I must stay in the shadows. I remember one year when the rains destroyed everything. The roof leaked, the walls cracked, and sickness came. My body burned with fever, but I still went out to work. I told myself, if I can just buy him food for one more day, that will be enough. That was how my years went, one day at a time. There were times when I wanted to give up, but whenever I looked at his sleeping face, I would remember why I was alive. I wanted him to be more than my pain. I wanted him to stand where I could not. When David turned 18, I felt a kind of joy I can't describe. He was tall, polite, and full of dreams. The day he got admission into university, I fell on my knees and cried. Not because I was sad, but because my prayers were finally walking on two legs. But joy is an expensive thing. I had no money for his fees. I went from door to door, begging people who once mocked me for help. Some shut their doors in my face. Some told me, "You should have married better." Others gave small coins, pity disguised as charity. I didn't care. I gathered every note, every coin, until I could send him off with enough to start. The first day he left for school, I walked him to the bus park, holding his bag like it was gold. I watched him climb into that old bus, and I waved until the dust covered my face. That dust was sacred to me. It was the dust of progress. Years passed, and letters started coming. Short messages filled with hope. He told me how hard he was studying, how he wanted to make me proud. I still remember the day he graduated. The church bells were ringing that morning, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating with me. I wore my best wrapper, the blue one I'd kept for years. When he walked across the stage to receive his certificate, I shouted his name so loud that people turned to look. I didn't care. He was my victory, my answered prayer. Not long after, by some miracle, he got a job. A good one, better than anything I had ever dreamed. He called me on the phone that evening. His voice was shaking with joy. "Mama," he said, "God has done it. I got the job." I fell to my knees and thanked heaven until my floor was wet with tears. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the stars and whispering, "At last, my storms are over." But life is a strange teacher. I thought my suffering had ended, that my reward had come. I didn't know then that storms don't always roar. Some walk in quietly, dressed in silk and perfume, smiling as they steal everything you ever fought for. I thought my storms were finally over, but storms don't always come with thunder. Some come wearing perfume and a smile. When David handed me the keys to our new home, I felt like heaven had answered every tear I cried. There are moments in a mother's life that shine brighter than all her years of suffering. For me, that moment came the day David held out a small silver key, and said, "Mama, this is yours. Our home." I remember staring at the key, unable to speak. My hands shook as I took it from him. It felt heavier than gold because I knew what it had cost. Not in money, but in prayers, in fasting, in nights spent whispering hope into darkness. That day, I followed him to the new house, a beautiful 2-story building on the edge of the city. The walls were painted cream, the air smelled of fresh paint and promise, and the sunlight slipped through the windows like a blessing. When I stepped inside, I could not hold my tears. I fell to my knees right there in the living room and lifted my hands. "Thank you, Lord," I said, my voice trembling. "You have turned my sorrow into songs." David laughed softly and helped me to my feet. "Mama, no more tears," he said, smiling. "From now on, you rest. Let me take care of you." Those words wrapped around my heart like music. For the first time in many years, I felt the warmth of peace. Every pain, every insult, every hungry night suddenly became worth it. The days that followed were bright. I woke each morning to the smell of breakfast David had ordered just for me. Sometimes I would peek into his room and see him dressed in his fine suit, tying his tie before work. My heart would swell with pride. I would whisper under my breath, "See what the Lord has done." Each evening, he would return home with small gifts, a new wrapper, groceries, sometimes my favorite bread from the corner bakery. We would sit together at dinner, talking about everything. I would tease him about his long hours at work. He would laugh and tell me, "Mama, I'm just trying to make you proud." And he did. He made me so proud that sometimes I forgot how hard life had once been. Our laughter filled the house like light spilling through open windows. Even neighbors would stop to admire how close we were. They would say, "That woman is blessed. Her son honors her." In those days, I truly believed my prayers had reached heaven. I saw in David everything I had hoped for: discipline, gratitude, humility. When he smiled, I saw his childhood. When he prayed, I saw my own faith reflected back at me. I remember one Sunday morning in particular. We were walking back from church under the bright sun. David carried my handbag while I shaded him with my scarf. People passing by smiled at us. "Mama, you don't have to protect me," he said, laughing. "I've been protecting you since you were born," I answered. "I don't know how to stop." He laughed again, that deep, warm laugh that could melt my heart in seconds. Those were my golden days, the years when everything I had endured seemed to make sense. But happiness has a strange power. It makes you forget that pain still exists. It makes you believe storms will never return once the sky clears. I stopped worrying, stopped expecting trouble. I thought our story had reached its ending, the happy ending I had dreamed of while washing other people's clothes under the sun. At night, when David slept, I would sit by my window, watching the stars. I would whisper prayers of gratitude instead of desperation. "Thank you, Lord," I would say. "You remembered me. You did not let my tears fall for nothing." Sometimes I even caught myself dreaming of grandchildren, of small footsteps running across this very floor. I would smile at the thought, my heart light like it had never known sorrow. Life had finally rewarded me, or so I thought. But every season carries its shadow. Every light attracts something waiting to dim it. I didn't know it then, but even as we laughed and prayed, fate was quietly setting the next chapter of our story. But even in sunshine, shadows wait their turn. One evening, David came home from a business trip. I heard his car horn outside and ran to the door, smiling as usual. But that day was different. There was someone standing beside him. A woman, tall, elegant, her voice soft as silk. Her perfume reached me before her smile did. David's eyes sparkled as he said, "Mama, meet someone special." I didn't know it then, but the peace I had spent a lifetime building was about to be tested. And her name was Beatrice, the shadow behind the smile. I knew from her first smile. Not all sweetness is pure. David had gone on a short business trip that year, and when he returned, he wasn't alone. I still remember the sound of his car pulling up to the gate. Louder than usual, confident, proud. I hurried to the door like any mother would, excited to see her son again. But as the car door opened, a woman stepped out first. She was beautiful, the kind of beauty that draws eyes without effort. Skin smooth as silk, gold earrings catching the sunlight, perfume heavy enough to claim the air before she even spoke. "Good afternoon, Mama," she said, smiling like a portrait. Her voice was soft and sweet, but something in her eyes didn't match. Behind that sweetness, I sensed calculation, a quiet pride watching every reaction. David's face glowed with happiness. "Mama, meet Beatrice," he said, his voice almost trembling. "The woman I told you about." I smiled back, because that's what mothers do. "You're welcome, my dear," I said, stretching my hands to her. Any friend of my son is a daughter to me. But when she took my hands, they felt cold. She held them lightly, as if touching me might stain her fingers. It was a small thing, but mothers notice what words can't say. Inside, I served them dinner, rice and stew, the kind David loved as a boy. He ate joyfully, but Beatrice only poked at her plate, careful not to stain her lipstick. "Mama, this is nice," she said politely, though her eyes wandered to her phone more than her food. I told myself not to judge too quickly. Perhaps she was shy. Perhaps I was just being protective. In the days that followed, she visited often. She laughed easily when David spoke, but I noticed how she looked away when I tried to join the conversation. She never raised her voice, never said anything rude, but her silence carried its own sharpness, like a knife hidden behind a smile. I remember one afternoon when I offered to show her how to cook David's favorite soup. She laughed softly and said, "Oh no, Mama. Those things are not for me. David likes it when I rest." I forced a smile. "Rest is good, my dear," I said quietly, "but a home breathes through the hands of a woman." She only smiled again and went back to scrolling on her phone. That night, when David returned from work, I tried to speak to him gently. "My son," I said, "you know I want your happiness more than my own. But be careful. Not every beauty holds peace." He frowned slightly and shook his head. "Mama," he said with a smile that felt forced, "you're judging her too soon. Beatrice is different. She understands me." "Maybe," I said softly. "But love can be loud in the beginning and quiet in the end. Listen to more than words, my son." He laughed and kissed my forehead. "Mama, you worry too much. You've prayed all your life for my joy. Now let me enjoy it." I said nothing more. Sometimes silence is the only way to keep peace. The following months passed like a dream I couldn't wake from. David spent less time at home, more time planning his future with her. I would often find him sitting by the window at night, talking on the phone, smiling like a young man in his first love. And though I was happy to see him laugh, something deep inside me felt uneasy, like a quiet knock from fate, warning me to stay alert. Soon he brought me news that took my breath away. "Mama," he said, "I've proposed to Beatrice. We're getting married." I wanted to be happy for him. I truly did. But the words stuck in my throat. I looked at his face, glowing with excitement, and I knew my warning would fall on deaf ears. So I smiled, even as my heart trembled. "Then may God bless your union, my son," I said. The wedding was a spectacle, large, colorful, grander than anything I'd ever seen. Expensive cars lined the street, photographers flashed lights everywhere, and the air was thick with the smell of wealth and perfume. David looked like a prince, and Beatrice, in her white gown, looked like a queen. As I sat quietly at the corner table, watching them dance, I whispered a prayer. "Lord, may I be wrong about her. Let her heart be good, even if my eyes cannot see it." People congratulated me, called me blessed, and said I had raised a fine son. I smiled at every word, but inside, a shadow moved. I couldn't explain it. It was just a feeling that something precious was slipping away. After the celebration, when everyone left, I stood alone in the empty hall. Flowers were still scattered across the floor, lights still glowed, but the joy I should have felt refused to rise. The echo of their laughter filled the room, and for the first time in many years, I felt like a guest in my own story. I didn't know it then, but I was already standing at the edge of a storm. But I was not wrong. I was simply too late. You don't notice the silence between hearts until it grows loud enough to hurt. The first months after their wedding were filled with noise, music, laughter, visitors, and the smell of new paint. But slowly, that noise faded. It didn't vanish all at once. It leaked away in small moments that most people would never notice. A missed greeting here, an absent smile there. Love rarely leaves in anger. It leaves in silence. David began coming home later each night. He said work was heavier now that he had been promoted. I believed him, or at least I wanted to. I told myself, this is how success looks. Busy hands, tired eyes, short words. But what I didn't see was how distance had already begun to bloom between us like an uninvited weed. When he was home, he was kind, but distracted. He would eat quietly, nod as I spoke, then slip away to his room to answer messages or laugh at something on his phone. The boy who once told me every detail of his day now spoke in half-sentences. And Beatrice, she was always nearby, smiling the kind of smile that hides its teeth. Whenever David was around, she acted like an angel, serving his food, calling me Mama, asking about my health. But the moment he left for work, her voice changed. Her words turned sharp, her tone cold. Mama, please don't move that, she would say whenever I tried to help around the house. Or, David prefers things clean. Please don't make a mess. At first, I tried to stay out of her way. I thought perhaps I was old-fashioned, that maybe her ways were just different. But soon, she began leaving small traps of misunderstanding. A broken glass on the kitchen floor, a plate missing from the rack, a burned dish she claimed I'd ruined. One morning, David came home from work early. The moment he entered the kitchen, Beatrice sighed softly, shaking her head. I told Mama not to wash the crystal glasses, she said sweetly. They're too fragile. David looked at the floor. The fragments glittered like tears. I opened my mouth to speak, but his eyes met mine with quiet frustration. Mama, please be careful, he said, voice tired, not angry but distant. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the unfamiliar tone. That was the first crack. From that day, something shifted in our home. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. Beatrice would sit beside David on the couch, telling him stories that painted me as clumsy, forgetful, and difficult. She never accused me directly. She only planted seeds, little by little, watering them with false innocence. I could feel it happening. I saw it in David's eyes, the doubt creeping in, soft but steady. And I couldn't stop it. When he looked at me now, it was no longer through the eyes of a son, but through the eyes of a man weighing judgment. Sometimes I would stand in the hallway, listening to their laughter behind closed doors, and I would remember the boy who used to share every dream with me. I wondered where that boy had gone, and whether I had done something to lose him. At night I lay awake, replaying every moment, searching for what I could fix. I prayed quietly, Lord, if I have offended them, show me. Don't let my love become a burden. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. My hands grew restless because they had always been busy serving love, and now there was nothing left to hold. I tried speaking to David again, gently. My son, I said one evening, you seem far away these days. Is everything all right? He smiled faintly, not looking up from his phone. I'm fine, Mama. Don't worry. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. I walked back to my room, heart heavy. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the walls I had once decorated with photos of his graduation, his first job, his proud smile. They stared back at me, silent witnesses to a love losing its warmth. In that silence, I learned a painful truth. You can feed a child, clothe him, pray for him, and still lose him to the world. When a child you raised stops looking at you the same way, it feels like losing air. You keep breathing, but nothing fills you. Still, I refused to hate Beatrice. Instead, I prayed harder. God, keep peace in this house. Don't let lies destroy what love built. But sometimes prayers take longer to reach heaven, because what she did next was darker than I could have ever imagined. A plan not born of anger, but of envy. But what she did next was darker than I ever imagined. A plan born from envy. A lie can ruin what truth took a lifetime to build. It began on an ordinary afternoon, so ordinary that I almost missed the scent of trouble. Beatrice moved about the house like perfume, soft, sweet, and everywhere. She hummed a song as she arranged flowers in the vase, her smile gentle, her eyes cold. I didn't know she was waiting for the moment my back would turn. That day, while I was in the kitchen preparing soup, she slipped quietly into my room. Later I would learn that her delicate hands were not carrying love, but deceit. Hidden inside her purse was a small nylon bundle, dry herbs with a bitter smell. The market women said such herbs could curse a woman's womb. She hid them deep in my drawer, beneath folded wrappers, careful not to leave a trace. When she closed the drawer, the house looked peaceful again. Evening came, with golden light streaming through the windows. I set the table and waited for David, humming the same church hymn I always sang while cooking. But that night, the hymn died halfway through. I heard quiet sobs coming from their room. My heart skipped. I thought perhaps they had argued. I wiped my hands and went closer, but before I could knock, David's voice echoed, worried, trembling. Beatrice, what happened? Why are you crying? Her voice answered between sniffles, perfectly measured. David, I didn't want to tell you this. I'm scared. I froze outside the door, not daring to move. I saw something today, she continued. Your mother. She was acting strange. I was in the kitchen, and I saw her sprinkle something into the pot I cooked for myself. I didn't want to believe it, but I checked after she left, and I found herbs, the kind that ruin a woman's body. There was silence, then the sound of movement, David pacing, his breath quick. No, that can't be true, he said. My mother would never. But Beatrice knew how to play her role. David, why would I lie? You know she never liked me. She warned you against marrying me. Maybe she wants to stop me from giving you children. Then came another sob, softer, deadlier. I love you, but I can't live in fear. I heard footsteps rushing down the hallway, heavy, fast, filled with confusion. The next thing I knew, my door burst open. David stood there, eyes blazing, chest rising and falling like he had run through fire. Mama, he said, his voice shaking. What did you do? I stared at him, confused. What do you mean, my son? He didn't answer. He began searching my room like a man possessed. Drawers opened, clothes scattered, shoes thrown aside. Then his hand stopped. He lifted the small nylon bag, those same bitter herbs, and turned toward me. The look in his eyes froze my soul. What is this, Mama? Tell me what this is doing here. I felt the blood drain from my face. I don't know, I whispered. I have never seen that before. Behind him, Beatrice appeared at the doorway, tears glistening perfectly on her cheeks. You see, David? She said softly. I told you. No, I said quickly, stepping forward. My son, you know me. I raised you. I would never harm your wife. Look into my eyes. Does this look like the face of a woman who would poison anyone? But his mind was no longer his own. The words bounced off the walls and fell back at my feet. He clenched his jaw, his voice rising. "Enough, Mama. You warned me about her before, and now you do this? You must leave this house tomorrow." "David, please," I cried, falling to my knees. "I swear before God. I am innocent. Don't let lies destroy us." He turned his face away. "Tomorrow, Mama," he repeated. "I can't bear this anymore." The room spun. My knees trembled beneath me. I wanted to scream, to wake him from whatever spell had taken him, but no sound came. Only Beatrice's soft voice filled the silence, whispering false comfort into his ear. When they left the room, the door closed slowly, gently, like a knife sliding into flesh without noise. I sank onto the floor, my hands shaking, eyes burning. Everything I had built, every prayer, every sacrifice was collapsing around me, not because of strangers, but because of the ones I loved most. I sat there until the lamp went out, staring at the little packet on the floor. The smell of those herbs filled the air, bitter, cruel, final. And just like that, my world ended, not by strangers, but by the very hands I had once fed. The hardest road to walk is the one that leads away from your child. The morning came too early that day. The air was heavy, and the first light of dawn spilled quietly through the window as I packed my small bag. My hands trembled over the same clothes I had folded so many times before. This time they were not for travel or visit. They were for exile. David sat in the living room, his face hard, eyes fixed on the floor. Beatrice stood beside him, like a queen before a servant's punishment. The silence was so thick I could hear my heartbeat echo against the walls. I held my bag close and stepped forward. My voice was weak but steady. "David," I said softly, "before I leave, hear me once more. I carried you in my womb. I raised you with my tears. I loved you even when the world forgot me. Whatever you believe now, remember this. I forgive you. And one day, truth will shine." He didn't look up. He just nodded once, quick and small, as if agreeing to end a conversation he didn't want. I turned toward the door, my knees trembling, and walked out of the house I had once called my own. The sun was rising, gold spreading across the city, but to me, it felt like dusk. The gate closed behind me with the same sound it had made the first day I came there. Only now, I was leaving not as a mother, but as a stranger. I walked slowly down the street, unsure where to go. The city was already alive, vendors calling out prices, taxis honking, children laughing on their way to school. I looked around, and for the first time, I had nowhere to belong. Every face I saw reminded me of a life that was still whole, unlike mine. My heart felt like a stone dragging through my chest. Each step was heavy, each breath painful. I whispered to myself, "Keep walking, Margaret. If you stop, you'll drown in your own sorrow." As I walked, memories rose like ghosts beside me. The nights I stayed hungry so David could eat. The mornings I washed other people's clothes while whispering his name in prayer. I remembered the first time he called me Mama, the first day of school, the graduation, the job. Every sacrifice replayed in my mind like scenes from a film I no longer wanted to watch. I reached the end of the street and looked back one last time. The mansion stood tall, untouched, its windows gleaming like nothing had changed. But behind that beauty was my broken home, my broken heart. I turned away, because even looking at it felt like betrayal to myself. The day grew hotter, and my legs ached. I wandered through the city, past busy markets and quiet alleys, searching for any place to rest. People brushed past me without seeing me, just another old woman with a bag. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but I didn't have the strength to beg. When evening came, I sat on a bench by the roadside. The world kept moving around me, fast and indifferent. I bowed my head and whispered, "God, if there is still a purpose left for me, show me the road." And then, through the fog of exhaustion, a name came to my heart. Grace. She was an old friend, a woman I hadn't seen in years. Back when times were hard, she had once shared her bread with me. If she was still alive, maybe she could help me find my footing again. I wiped my tears, gathered what little courage I had left, and set off toward the part of the city where she used to live. The journey felt endless, but God must have guided my steps. I reached her small compound just as the sky turned orange. I hesitated at the gate, afraid she wouldn't remember me, afraid she would see my pain and close the door like everyone else had. I knocked gently. The door opened, and there she was. Older now, but her eyes still kind. For a long moment, she just stared at me, mouth open, hand on her chest. "Margaret?" she whispered. "Is it really you?" I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. Tears rolled down before words could form. "Grace," I said finally. I have nowhere else to go." She didn't let me finish. She ran forward and held me in her arms. "Oh, my friend," she cried, "after everything you did for me, how could I ever turn you away?" Her warmth broke the dam inside me. I wept in her arms like a child, the way I hadn't wept even when my son cast me out. She led me inside, sat me down, and brought me water and food. I ate slowly, my hands shaking, feeling human again for the first time in days. That night, as I lay on her small couch with a blanket over me, I whispered to the darkness, "Sometimes, strangers show you the love blood forgets." I closed my eyes, not knowing that Grace's kindness would be the first light on the long road that would change everything. And that stranger's kindness would become the bridge to my new life. When life breaks you, God sometimes sends old faces to mend you. The morning after I found shelter in Grace's home, the world already looked gentler. The air smelled of pap and fresh rain. For the first time in many nights, I woke up to kindness instead of fear. Grace was in the kitchen, humming an old hymn. "Sleep well?" she asked, smiling. I nodded, unable to hide the tears that filled my eyes. "I don't deserve this," I whispered. She placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "You gave when you had nothing. Now let others give to you." Days passed, and peace slowly returned to me. Grace treated me like family. She never asked for explanations or judged my silence. We spent evenings sitting on her veranda, sharing stories of our youth, laughing softly over memories that time had not stolen. I began to breathe again. One bright afternoon, I heard a car stop outside the compound. A young man stepped out, tall, neatly dressed, eyes full of light. Grace ran to the gate, joy spilling from her voice. "My son," she cried, "you're finally home." He hugged her tightly. "Mama, it's been too long." Then his eyes met mine. Grace introduced us. "This is Mrs. Margaret, the woman I told you about." He looked surprised. "So, this is the woman," he said with quiet awe. "The one who helped you when Father was sick." I smiled shyly. "Ah, that was long ago, my son. Anyone would have done the same." He shook his head. "Not everyone would. My mother told me you shared your last meal with her when she had none. She said you taught her faith when hope was running away." I tried to laugh it off, but emotion caught my throat. Before I could speak, he said gently, "Mama Margaret, please allow me to thank you in my own way." I didn't know what he meant until a week later, when he returned with an envelope. "Mama," he said, pressing it into my hands, "this is for you." Inside was money, more than I had ever held at once. "Use it for yourself," he said. "And there's something else I want to show you." He drove me and Grace to a quiet neighborhood at the edge of town. When the car stopped, I saw a small but beautiful house with flowers in front and blue curtains fluttering in the windows. I turned to him, confused. "Is someone moving in?" He smiled. "Yes, Mama, you." The words struck me like thunder and mercy together. "No, my son. I can't. This is too much." He shook his head firmly. Nothing is too much for a woman who once fed my mother when the world turned its back. You gave us life when we had none. Let me return that gift." My knees weakened. I sank to the ground, tears streaming freely. "After all my tears, God remembered me through another woman's child," I whispered. Grace helped me stand and wrapped her arms around me. We cried together, two women who had learned that kindness never dies. It only waits for its season to bloom. That evening, I stood in my new home, running my fingers across the walls, feeling their strength beneath my palm. It wasn't luxury, it was peace, and peace was more precious than gold. But even as I settled in, a quiet thought grew inside me. I have been rescued not to rest, but to serve. My pain had taught me compassion. Now I wanted to turn that compassion into purpose. I decided that my home would not be a place of silence, but a place of comfort. I began visiting the nearby market, meeting children who wandered hungry and alone. I would bring them food, listen to their stories, and remind them that love still existed somewhere. Every evening I returned home, tired but fulfilled, whispering to the sky, "Thank you, Lord, for giving my sorrow a reason to live." Grace's son continued to help me, sending money each month for the small orphan work I had started. Slowly, people began to notice. They saw not a broken woman, but a mother reborn through mercy. And in every smile I saw on those children's faces, I found a piece of the joy I had lost. Because when pain turns into purpose, even sorrow becomes sacred. I lost one son, but God gave me hundreds of children to love. In the quiet of my new home, I found a rhythm I had never known before. Peace that came not from riches, but from purpose. The small kitchen smelled of food again, but this time it wasn't cooked for one. It was for the children who began to gather around my gate, eyes wide, stomachs empty, hearts searching for warmth. It started with just two, a boy and a girl who slept by the market stalls at night. I had seen them several times, picking leftovers after traders closed their shops. One day I called them over and shared my food. Their hands trembled as they ate, and I saw in their faces the same hunger that had once haunted my son's childhood. When they finished, the little boy said, "Thank you, Mama." It was the first time in years that word had sounded like music to me. After that day, more children began to come. Word spread among the street kids. Mama Grace gives food. Some came for a meal, some for a kind word, others just to hear someone call them my child. Soon, my small house was full of laughter, noise, and tiny feet running across the floor. I didn't plan to become anyone's savior. I was just a woman who knew what it meant to be forgotten. But as the days turned into months, those children became my family. I cooked for them, taught them how to read, helped them pray before bed. At night, I would tuck them under thin blankets and whisper blessings over their dreams. People from the neighborhood started calling me Mama Grace. At first, it made me laugh. "I already have a Grace," I'd say, pointing to my friend who had saved me. But they insisted, "You are a mother of many." And slowly, that name began to feel like a crown I hadn't asked for, but had earned through pain. Sometimes I would sit on the veranda, watching the children play. The sound of their laughter filled every corner that had once echoed with silence. My heart, once a wound, now beat like a drum of hope. I realized then that God had replaced my sorrow not by erasing it, but by giving it meaning. Each child carried a story. One lost his parents to sickness, another ran away from abuse, another had never known a family. I learned every name, every scar, every dream. I became their shelter, their teacher, their mother. And through them, I felt my brokenness healing. One day, a local pastor visited. He looked around at the children and said, "Mama Grace, you've built an orphanage without even trying." I smiled. "No, Pastor," I said. "I've just built a home, the kind I once lost." With Grace's help and her son's continued support, we turned the small house into a proper place of refuge. We bought mats, clothes, school books, and a big pot for cooking. Every morning, I would wake before sunrise to prepare breakfast for more than 20 children. The neighbors began to help, too. Some brought rice, others clothes, some even volunteered to teach. Hope had become contagious. At night, when everyone slept, I often sat by the doorway, staring at the stars. I would think of David, wondering where he was, whether he was happy, whether his heart ever remembered me. I didn't hate him anymore. I had learned that forgiveness is not forgetting. It is simply choosing peace over pain. There were days when I still missed him deeply. I would see one of the boys smile a certain way, and my heart would ache. But then another child would call out, "Mama Grace," and pull me back into the present, a present filled with love that had no boundaries. I became the mother I had always been. Only now my children came from every corner of the street, every story of loss, every forgotten dream. I realized something powerful. Blood does not define motherhood. Love does. The mayor once came to visit our small home after hearing about our work. He asked me how I managed to care for so many with so little. I smiled and said, "You don't need much when your heart is full." That evening, as I watched the children sleep, my heart swelled with quiet joy. My hands, once weary from hardship, now found strength in service. My home, once empty, now overflowed with laughter. My life, once broken, had found new meaning. I whispered to the darkness, "Thank you, Lord, for making me a mother again." But while I built children's dreams, my own son's empire was collapsing brick by brick. When pride climbs too high, it forgets how hard the ground can be. They say pride builds its house on clouds, but when the storm comes, there is nothing beneath it to stand on. That storm came for my son, David, sooner than he ever expected. While I was building hope with orphans far away, his empire was beginning to crack. He didn't know it yet, but the same hands that had lifted him up were preparing to let him fall. It began quietly, a whisper in the corridors of his company. At first it was just rumors that the board was displeased. Then one morning, David received a call summoning him to an emergency meeting. He walked in proudly, unaware that he was walking into judgment. The conference room was filled with senior directors, faces he had once impressed, now looking at him with cold disapproval. At the head of the table sat the chairman, a man who had known our family long before David ever wore a suit. "David," the chairman said slowly, "do you know why you were hired into this company?" David straightened his tie, confident. "Because of my qualifications, sir. I worked hard for this position." The chairman shook his head. "No, son. You were hired because of your mother, Margaret. Years ago she worked for us as a cleaner. She was honest, faithful, and kind beyond words. She begged us for a chance for her son. You. We saw her sincerity and gave you that chance." David froze, the blood draining from his face. "My mother?" he whispered. "Yes," the chairman continued, his tone tightening. "We believed that a son raised by such a woman would carry the same values. But now we hear how you cast her out, how you dishonored her after all she did for you. Tell me, David, if a man can betray his own mother, how can we trust him with our business?" The room fell silent. Every word landed like a hammer on his heart. David tried to speak, but his throat betrayed him. "Sir, please, it's not like that. I was misled. Things weren't what they seemed." The chairman cut him off with a raised hand. "We've heard enough. You are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Leave your office today." David's world collapsed. The same walls that had once echoed with applause now closed in on him like a prison. He left the building with his head bowed, his briefcase heavy with failure. For days, he couldn't tell Beatrice the truth. He pretended to go to work, dressing up each morning and returning late just to maintain the illusion. But secrets are like smoke. They find their way out. When she finally discovered the truth, her reaction wasn't sympathy. It was disgust. "You got fired?" she shouted. "David, how could you be so careless? Do you know how embarrassing this is for me?" He tried to explain, but her words came faster than his breath. "You've ruined everything. All these years, I thought I married a successful man. Now you're nothing but a failure." The arguments became daily storms. Beatrice stopped cooking, stopped caring. She spent her days at salons and her nights scrolling through her phone, chatting with people David didn't know. Money began to vanish like sand through fingers. First the car, then the jewelry, then the second car. When the bank finally froze his accounts, Beatrice's affection froze with it. He grew thinner, quieter, haunted by ghosts no one else could see. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw my face, the moment I stood at his door with my bag, saying, "I forgive you, my son." Those words now burned more than any curse could. He tried to find me. He asked old neighbors, old friends, even went back to the neighborhood where I once worked. But no one knew where I had gone. Some told him the truth he didn't want to hear. "You're only looking for her now? Where were you when she needed you?" Each rejection stabbed deeper than poverty. The world that once bowed before him now turned its back. He began to drink, just to sleep without dreams. Beatrice stopped pretending to love him. Her voice became poison, every word a reminder that his pride had built a life too fragile to last. One evening, she said what his heart had feared for months. "I can't live like this, David. I deserve better. You're not the man I married." He begged her to stay, but she only laughed bitterly. "You were a stepping stone. Now you're a stone in my path." As she turned to leave, he saw in her eyes the same coldness I had once seen, the same smile that had fooled him and destroyed me. And for the first time, he truly understood the depth of what he had done. He sat alone that night in the silence of his empty house. The same mansion he had once filled with pride and laughter, now echoed with loneliness. The walls whispered memories he could not bear. My laughter, my prayers, the sound of home he had thrown away. He whispered into the darkness, "Mother, forgive me." But the darkness did not answer. But the real punishment was yet to come, from the same woman he chose over me. The lies he believed became the chains that broke him. Pride had already stripped David of his peace, but what came next tore away whatever was left of his soul. It happened one weary evening. He had been out all day, walking through the city with a folder of resumes that no one wanted to see. His shirt was soaked in sweat, and his eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights. As he reached home, he noticed something strange. Laughter echoing from the bedroom. Not the laughter of joy, but the cruel kind that follows deceit. He paused by the half-open door. Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to her ear, her voice dripping with arrogance. "I told you I never loved him," she said, laughing softly. "Do you think I would waste my time with a man who's broke? I only stayed for the money. He was my ticket to the life I wanted. Now that it's gone, so am I." David froze. His heart pounded like thunder. The phone call continued, every word slicing deeper. "No, I never wanted children with him," she continued. "Why would I? That man's bloodline carries poverty and weakness. I told the doctor I'd never risk it." For a long moment, David couldn't breathe. The woman he had defended against the whole world, the woman for whom he had cast his mother out, was confessing that everything had been a lie. He stepped into the room. "Beatrice," he said, his voice trembling. She turned, startled, then rolled her eyes as if caught doing something trivial. "So you heard," she said coldly. "Good. Saves me the trouble of pretending. Everything you said, is it true?" he asked quietly, his voice barely holding together. She stood up, folding her arms. "Of course it's true. Did you really think I loved you? Look at you now. No money, no job, no status. You're nothing, David. Nothing without your wealth. He took a step closer, eyes filled with disbelief. I gave up everything for you. I turned against my own mother. She laughed, a sound so cruel it made the walls shiver. And that was your biggest mistake. You gave up the only person who ever truly loved you for a woman who never did. How pathetic. David's legs gave way, and he sank into the chair beside the bed. Please, he whispered. Don't do this. I can rebuild everything. Just stay. But Beatrice had already made up her mind. Stay? She scoffed. With a man who can't even pay his bills. No, David. I've wasted enough of my youth on you. She picked up her suitcase, one she had clearly packed long before that day. I'm leaving, she said, her voice sharp as glass. And don't bother begging. You were a chapter. I'm done reading. He reached out to stop her, but she pulled her hand away. Goodbye, David. Enjoy your poverty. She walked out of the house without looking back. The sound of the door closing echoed like a gunshot. And just like that, silence swallowed everything. For hours, David sat in that same chair, staring at nothing. The clock ticked, but time no longer moved. The house, once filled with music and laughter, now stood like a graveyard of broken promises. He looked around. Every piece of furniture, every wall, every memory whispered betrayal. That night, he broke down completely. He wept the way I once had, not quietly, but with the kind of pain that rips through the soul. Mother, he whispered between sobs, you were right. She was never what I thought, and I was blind. He remembered my words, the last ones I spoke before leaving. I forgive you, my son. One day, truth will shine. And now, in his ruin, that truth burned brighter than any flame. He left the house the next morning with nothing but a torn heart and a small bag. The same way I once left his mansion. The circle had turned. Life had given him the same road I had walked, only now it was his turn to feel its stones. For weeks he searched for me, asking in markets, churches, and old neighborhoods. Many looked at him with pity. You're too late, they said. You should have listened when she warned you. But he didn't stop. Every night he prayed for one thing only, a chance to see me again, to kneel before me, and beg forgiveness. The same son who had thrown me into the street was now walking the streets himself, seeking mercy. And then, one fateful morning, as he passed by a newspaper stand, he saw something that made his knees buckle. On the front page was my picture, smiling, surrounded by children. The headline read, Elderly Hero Honored. Mama Grace Celebrated for Changing Lives of Orphans. He stared at the image, trembling. I was no longer the woman he had abandoned. The world now knew me as a light in the darkness, a mother to the motherless, a woman reborn from pain. He pressed the paper to his chest and wept in the middle of the street. The same tears he had ignored in me were now his own. And when he finally saw her again, she wasn't the woman he left behind. She was the woman the world now honored. Sometimes, the only way back home is through tears. David didn't waste a moment after seeing my picture in the newspaper. His hands trembled as he folded the paper, his heart racing faster than his steps. Every word he read burned with regret. Elderly woman honored for saving lives of homeless children. That elderly woman was me, the same mother he had once thrown out into the streets. He set out that very day, carrying nothing but his guilt and the torn remains of hope. The journey to my city was long, but no distance felt longer than the one between his past and forgiveness. Every mile reminded him of my words. I forgive you, my son. One day, truth will shine. When he finally reached the orphanage, the sun was high and warm. Laughter filled the compound, children running barefoot, chasing one another, their joy echoing across the walls. And there, under the shade of a mango tree, I stood, holding a tray of food, smiling as I fed the little ones. David stopped at the gate, unable to move. For a long moment, he just watched. The mother he had rejected, now radiant and peaceful, surrounded by love that he had never understood. I had once looked old and weary, but now grace had made me glow again. He saw it clearly. Pain had not destroyed me. It had purified me. His knees gave way before he even reached me. I turned at the sound, and time froze. My eyes met his, and the world seemed to fall silent. The boy I once carried, the man who had broken me, was kneeling in the dust, tears streaming down his face. "Mother," he said, his voice cracked and trembling, "please forgive me. I was blind. I let lies turn my heart to stone. You were right about everything. I lost everything because I lost you." I stood frozen, my heart pounding. The memories rushed back, the pain, the betrayal, the night he told me to leave. But then I saw his tears, real and heavy, the kind that come from a soul finally awake. My hands trembled as I stepped closer. "David," I whispered, my voice breaking, "do you know what it felt like to be thrown out by my own child? The son I starved for, the boy I prayed for every night?" He bowed lower, his forehead touching the ground. "Mother, please don't remind me," he wept. "Every day since that night, I've heard your voice in my sleep. I've lived in shame. I would give anything to undo what I did." Tears filled my eyes, and for a moment I didn't know whether to hold him or walk away. But love, true motherly love, has no boundaries, no expiry date. I knelt beside him, lifted his face in my hands, and whispered, "I forgive you, my son. The love of a mother has no expiry date." When our tears met, the years of pain finally broke. We wept together, not as a sinner and the sinned against, but as a mother and child finding their way home again. The children around us paused their play, watching silently as if heaven itself had descended upon that small courtyard. From that day on, David never left my side again. He stayed at the orphanage, helping with the children, cooking, fixing things, laughing again for the first time in years. Every smile he shared with those little ones seemed to wash away a piece of his guilt. He told me one evening as we watched the sunset, "Mother, I thought success was about power, but now I see it was always about people, about love." I smiled, touching his hand gently. "We all learn through pain, my son. The trick is to let the pain teach you, not destroy you." Weeks turned into months, and life began to blossom anew. One afternoon, David met a young woman at the orphanage, Amanda. She had come to volunteer with the children. She was gentle, humble, and her heart was full of kindness. I noticed how she treated the children, with patience, warmth, and laughter. But what moved me most was how she treated me. She would sit beside me, listen to my stories, help with chores, and often say, "Mama Grace, you remind me of my own mother." David was drawn to her, but differently this time. There was no pride, no show, no illusion, just quiet admiration. He found in her what he had never found in Beatrice, peace. Over time, their friendship blossomed into love, the kind built not on money, but on respect and shared kindness. When he finally asked for my blessing to marry her, I wept tears of joy. "This time," I said, placing my hand on his head, "you are choosing light over shadow, and I bless it with all that's left of my heart." Their wedding was simple. No grand halls, no expensive clothes, no noise of vanity, just laughter, prayers, and genuine love. The orphans sang hymns as Amanda and David exchanged vows. It was the kind of beauty that money could never buy. Years passed peacefully. They were blessed with children, my grandchildren, who filled the orphanage with even more laughter. I grew older, but happier. I would sit under that same mango tree, watching them play, feeling God's mercy wrap around me like morning light. Sometimes at night, David would sit beside me, and we would talk quietly about the journey we had walked, from betrayal to forgiveness, from ashes to grace. "Mother," he said one night, "I thought I lost everything when I lost my wealth. But I realize now, I only found life when I found forgiveness." I smiled at him, my heart full. "And I said, thought I lost my son forever. But God gave him back to me, not in pride, but in peace. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the weapon that ends pain. I lost everything once, but in mercy, I found everything again." If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Share it with someone who still believes in the power of forgiveness. Tell me in the comments. What part of Margaret and David's journey moved you the most? And if you love true, emotional stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because many more heart-touching life stories are coming soon. Stories that will stay with you long after the video ends.